A gun that was supposedly taken off the streets through a police buyback mysteriously ended up in the hands of a teenager. This might sound like a bad joke, but it's an actual case that cuts straight to the heart of why these buyback programs aren't just pointless and useless. They can become hazardous to law-abiding people. In this video, we'll talk about how a Glock 21 vanished from a Chicago police station, how the city's own lawsuit against Glock plays into this mess, and why this fiasco isn't the first time a buyback has backfired. Let's start with the incident that set the internet on fire. A Glock turned in at a December 2023 event at St. Sabina Church in Auburn. Gresham disappeared right under the Chicago Police Department's nose. One officer noticed something off when a slip for a Glock pistol ended up on a completely different handgun, and he suddenly realized the real Glock was missing. Worse yet, the Glock wasn't just lost in some warehouse. It wound up on the street, with a 16-year-old boy found clutching it almost a year later. The story has it all. A buyback event full of officers admiring this particular Glock, people tossing around gift cards, some of which were expired, and a station inventory process so chaotic that nobody had a firm handle on who was doing what. If you're like me, you're probably wondering how a department that claims to be removing guns from circulation manages to misplace one in its own station. That question became even more pressing when we learned that only a single sergeant, Robert Brown Jr., faced any meaningful scrutiny, getting a mere one-day suspension. No one else was disciplined, no further explanation was offered, and the force then repeated its standard line: "We take gun safety seriously." Meanwhile, that missing Glock ended up arming a minor. There's a Pro-2A principle we live by. The best way to reduce gun crime is to enforce existing laws on the real perpetrators. If you genuinely want to reduce the illegal flow of firearms, you arrest criminals and keep them behind bars, not rely on a buyback that can't even track its own stash. What do you make of all this? Is it plain incompetence, or is there something more sinister at play? Let me know in the comments, because it's always important to hear from fellow defenders of our rights and see what's on your mind. It's these kinds of revelations that remind us just how misguided so many so-called solutions to gun violence really are. Let's dig into the details of this fiasco. The St. Sabina buyback event was billed as a key piece of Chicago's effort to reduce violence. People line up, turn in their firearms, no questions asked, and receive gift cards as a reward. If you only heard the city's announcements, you'd imagine dangerous individuals strolling in to give up their prized weapons. But anyone who's been paying attention knows that's fantasy. Studies have shown that buybacks typically collect broken relics, antiques, or the occasional valuable gun from an owner who doesn't realize its worth. Real criminals rarely part with firearms that might be central to their business. Yet city leaders keep pushing these events, boasting about how many weapons have been taken off the street. When a Glock shows up in near-perfect condition and catches the eye of the officers, you'd think they'd treat it with extra caution. But that's not what happened. According to accounts from a Chicago police officer handling the inventory, the procedure switched on the fly, probably because they had to process a few hundred guns and wanted to save time. Documents that were supposed to pair each gun with its information got shuffled, and somehow the Glock's paperwork ended up pinned to a cheap .25 caliber chrome handgun. By the time people realized there was a mismatch, the Glock was gone. Boxes were torn apart, trash cans rifled through, and even coworkers' bags were searched. Nothing turned up. Then, as if in some twisted magic trick, the Glock reemerged nearly a year later after a foot chase, now clutched by a teenager. For a program that's supposed to protect the public from firearms, losing track of an item as iconic as a Glock is downright ridiculous. That's just the start. Chicago's official stance is that buybacks help reduce crime. Yet, at the same time, the city has been engaged in a legal battle with the gun manufacturer Glock, accusing them of enabling criminals to convert certain pistol models into machine guns. By their logic, Glock is at fault because these handguns can be illegally modified with auto-sears, devices that are banned under federal law and punishable by up to 10 years in prison. The city's complaint basically says that Glock pistols are too susceptible to illegal conversions and that Glock should be forced to implement reasonable controls or stop selling to Chicago residents altogether. The city even tries to connect the brand to an epidemic of converted Glocks used in drive-by shootings and other crimes. Meanwhile, the city's own fiasco turned into an unwitting demonstration of who might really be fueling the problem. If they can't keep a turned-in Glock off the street, inside their own station, Maybe the best place to aim their frustration is at the flawed inventory process, or maybe at criminals who actually break the law. Instead, Chicago is busy claiming moral high ground and accusing Glock of being complicit in violence, all while ignoring that criminals can also 3D print autosears or import them illegally from overseas. That's not Glock's doing. This is the same city that loves to tout every gun they recover in these buyback events, padding the annual stats the Chicago Police Department uses to brag about removing thousands of firearms from circulation. They fail to mention that many are junk guns or antiques that pose no serious threat on the modern streets. But then you get a pristine Glock in top-notch shape, and it vanishes into thin air. If this weren't enough, there's a bigger pattern here, and we have a very relevant historical example. Back in 2006, Cook County Judge William Stewart Boyd surrendered 2 guns at a Chicago buyback. The city made a huge deal about that year's program, collecting close to 6,000 guns. Like the Glock case, everything seemed to run smoothly, until 5 years later, in 2012, when one of Judge Boyd's turned-in revolvers appeared at the scene of a fatal police shooting in Cicero. That case had an even more dramatic twist because the shooting victim's family claimed the gun had been planted. The city eventually did open an investigation, but guess what? No one was interviewed, and no significant changes were made. The officer assigned to investigate decided it would be difficult and unwise to talk to the many officers who had handled the buyback. It was swept under the rug. The judge was never questioned either. That means a Smith & Wesson .38 special revolver supposed to have been destroyed found its way to a fatal crime scene, and no one in Chicago law enforcement seemed all that driven to get answers. When you look at these two stories side by side, it becomes impossible to argue that they're random flukes. One can only assume that there's something structurally broken in how these buybacks are organized and how the CPD safeguards the items it's supposed to destroy. That didn't stop Chicago from continuing to push these events with little adjustment, claiming they're a cornerstone of the fight against crime. It also hasn't stopped them from filing lawsuits against Glock in which they blame the manufacturer for the city's gun violence epidemic. It's more convenient to scold a company than to fix the entire approach to policing and the incompetent oversight that leads to missing evidence. While I stand firmly in support of real, effective measures that focus on criminals, I can't stand by and watch officials brag about how they're removing guns from the street, only to see those weapons pop up in the hands of minors. If we were honest about solutions, we'd talk about focusing on people who are committing repeated felonies, investigating straw purchasers aggressively, and punishing those who run around with illegal autosears. But the city's lawsuit is heavy on theatrics, linking Glock to violence on the grounds that criminals can illegally modify a firearm, something that's already a felony. A part of me wonders, why isn't Chicago talking about the systematic failure that allowed a perfectly functioning Glock to just walk away inside a police station? The city is also going after suburban gun stores in the refiled lawsuit, claiming they continue to sell Glock pistols knowing they can be easily turned into machine guns. That argument conveniently ignores the fact that these modifications require a separate device that's already banned. I find it interesting that the city apparently wants a broad net of blame, ignoring that many criminals simply acquire guns by theft or illegal straw buying, not by strolling into a gun shop with proper ID and background checks. Meanwhile, the House Committee on Oversight is looking into possible collusion between the White House, Chicago officials, and anti-gun advocacy groups like Everytown, with emails suggesting there may have been behind-the-scenes coordination to pressure Glock into redesigning its products. This is all while the city can't even manage to keep a turned-in Glock inside its evidence room. Remember that teenager who ended up with the buyback Glock? He was eventually caught after allegedly messing with car door handles, prompting a chase by officers who saw him grab his waistband. Even that chase is a microcosm of how criminals operate. They're ready to ditch or pick up a firearm in a moment's notice because they know law enforcement is limited in what they can do. The boy is now facing a weapons possession charge, with the Cook County State's attorney offering a plea deal. Meanwhile, the mother is left stunned, asking how on earth a gun that was handed in for destruction could be floating around in her son's possession. Chicago officials and the Chicago Police Department have said almost nothing about how they intend to fix this. They sometimes point to minor inventory tweaks or better labeling of firearms. That's little comfort for anyone who watched officers literally rummage through trash bins inside the station, hoping to find a missing Glock. This is an ugly situation that might have been avoided if the police had done a better job. If this were about public safety, the city would publicly commit to investigating how many times guns turned in at these buybacks have gone missing. They'd clarify who is authorized to handle them and how they track each individual firearm. But they won't do that, because buybacks look good on paper. They offer a chance for a flashy press event where people can see piles of firearms stacked up and bagged for destruction. Or so they think. I'm not questioning the motives of every single officer involved. There might be honest cops who want to do the right thing. Yet with 2 separate incidents now in the books, we can't ignore that something is very wrong with how this is being carried out. It's a shame because laws already exist that are more than sufficient to nail criminals who misuse firearms. Converting a pistol into a machine gun is illegal under federal and state regulations, but that doesn't stop criminals from either printing or smuggling these parts into the country. Shifting the blame onto Glock is, in my view, the ultimate smokescreen. People who despise the Second Amendment would rather see the blame thrown at a manufacturer, so they can ignore the fact that Chicago's policies that hinge on softer sentencing or misguided buybacks, keep failing to clamp down on actual crime. I'm done watching politicians screw up, pass the blame, and then smile for the cameras like they've just saved the world. Are you okay with the people who lose track of guns pointing fingers at everyone but themselves? Or should we finally call out this sham for what it really is, a feel-good scam that puts lives at risk? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and while you're at it, hit like, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to click the bell icon for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.